At 2:17 on a cold October morning, 6-year-old Noah Carter sat alone beside a hospital bed, watching the green line on a monitor rise and fall with every breath his mother took. He had been sitting there for hours, long enough for the vending machines in the hallway to go quiet, long enough for visiting hours to end, long enough for the nurses on the evening shift to hand their work over to the nurses on the night shift. Outside, rain tapped against the hospital window in a steady rhythm. Inside, Noah held his mother's hand and waited for her eyes to open. They never did. At least not that night. A few feet away, two doctors stood in the hallway speaking in voices they thought a child couldn't hear. They talked about treatment options. They talked about costs. They talked about time. And while Noah didn't understand every word, he understood enough to know something was terribly wrong. His mother, Emily Carter, had always been the strongest person he knew. She worked 2 jobs. She skipped meals so he wouldn't have to. She smiled even when she was exhausted. And somehow, through every hardship life threw at them, she always found a way to tell Noah that everything would be okay. But now she lay motionless beneath a white hospital blanket. And for the first time in his young life, Noah wasn't sure she was telling the truth anymore. The official diagnosis had come 3 weeks earlier. What started as occasional dizziness quickly became emergency hospital visits, endless testing, and a mountain of medical bills that seemed to grow larger every day. Emily's savings disappeared almost immediately. Friends tried to help. Neighbors brought food. Church members prayed. But the reality was becoming impossible to ignore. The treatment she needed cost far more money than either of them had. And time was running out. For most children, a crisis like this would have meant turning to grandparents, aunts, uncles, or other family members. But Noah didn't have any of those options. There was no father waiting to step in, no relatives arriving from another state, no family safety net hidden somewhere in the background. As far as Noah knew, it had always been just the two of them, mother and son, against the world. And yet there was something Noah never fully understood. Whenever he asked about his family, his mother changed the subject. Whenever he asked about his father, she grew quiet. Whenever he asked why they seemed so alone, a strange sadness would pass across her face before she forced a smile and told him that some questions were better answered when he was older. Noah stopped asking, but the answers never stopped existing. And while he sat beside that hospital bed, staring at the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, he had no idea that a secret buried years before he was born was quietly waiting to resurface. A secret connected to a name that once opened doors across America. A name that appeared on magazine covers, concert posters, and television screens. A name that millions of people knew. Yet somehow, Noah had never heard the full story, because the people who knew it best had spent years making sure it stayed hidden. 3 days after that night in the hospital, Noah overheard a conversation that would change the course of his life forever. A local music competition was coming to town. The winner would receive $50,000. For most people, it was simply another talent show. For Noah, it sounded like a miracle. And before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At that moment, Noah made a decision no 6-year-old should ever have to make. If money was what stood between his mother and another chance at life, then somehow, some way, he was going to find it. He didn't know how. He didn't know whether anyone would even listen to him. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not going to sit back and watch his mother disappear. What happened next would stun an entire auditorium, leave a panel of judges speechless, and uncover a family secret that had remained hidden for nearly 20 years. Because when Noah finally stepped onto that stage and wrote his name on an audition form, everything changed. The moment the judges read his last name, the room fell silent. At first glance, Noah Anderson looked like any other struggling child trying to survive a difficult chapter of life. There was nothing about his appearance that suggested he carried a story capable of stopping a room full of strangers in their tracks. His clothes were worn. His shoes had seen better days. His backpack was old enough that the zipper barely worked. If you passed him on the street, you would probably see an ordinary 6-year-old boy and keep walking. And that was exactly what made the truth so remarkable. Because hidden beneath Noah's quiet smile was a mystery nobody saw coming. A mystery connected to one of the most celebrated names American music had ever known. For years, Noah had lived in a small apartment with his mother, Venus Anderson. To their neighbors, they were simply another hard-working family trying to get by. Venus worked long hours, paid her bills on time whenever she could, and rarely talked about herself. She never attended community gatherings. She never shared family photographs. She never discussed her past. Whenever conversations drifted toward relatives, childhood memories, or old friends, she found a polite way to change the subject. People assumed she was private. Nobody realized she was protecting something. Even Noah knew very little about the family whose name he carried. When other children asked about his father, he didn't know what to say. When school assignments required students to draw family trees, his always looked unfinished. Mother, son, and then empty spaces. The older he became, the more questions he had. Yet every answer seemed just out of reach. Sometimes Noah would notice his mother staring at an old wooden box she kept hidden in the back of her closet. Whenever she caught him looking, she would quickly close it and move on to something else. Other times, he would wake up in the middle of the night and hear her quietly listening to old songs through a pair of headphones while tears rolled down her face. He never understood why, and she never explained. What Noah didn't know was that long before hospital rooms, unpaid medical bills, and desperate prayers became part of their lives, a series of events had changed everything. Events tied directly to the Anderson name. Events that had started nearly 20 years earlier. Back then, the Anderson family wasn't unknown. Far from it. The name carried weight, influence, respect. People traveled across the country to attend their performances. Radio stations competed to play their music first. Television networks fought for exclusive interviews. For years, it seemed as though the Anderson family could do no wrong. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. Stories began circulating. Rumors spread. Questions appeared that nobody seemed willing to answer. Some claimed a family dispute had torn everything apart. Others believed money was involved. A few insisted the truth was much bigger than anyone realized. But no matter which version people chose to believe, one fact remained unchanged. The Anderson family vanished from public view, and with them disappeared answers that countless people had spent years trying to uncover. As the years passed, the mystery only grew. Journalists investigated. Fans speculated. Former industry insiders whispered theories. Yet nobody could explain why one of the most recognizable names in music had suddenly faded into silence. Even more puzzling was what happened afterward. Every trace of the family's next chapter seemed to disappear. Records became difficult to find. Photographs stopped appearing. Interviews ended. The trail went cold. And eventually, most people moved on. Or at least they thought they had. Because while the world forgot about the Anderson name, someone else was growing up carrying it every single day. That someone was Noah, the little boy sitting beside a hospital bed, desperately searching for a way to save his mother. The little boy who had no idea that his family's past was about to collide with his future. The little boy who would soon walk into a singing competition believing he was simply trying to win prize money. What he didn't realize was that the judges seated behind that table knew something he didn't. Something buried deep within the history of the Anderson family. Something that would explain why their expressions changed the instant they read his registration form. Because the moment they saw his surname, they weren't looking at an ordinary contestant anymore. They were looking at a ghost from a story they thought had ended decades ago. And to understand why that moment shocked everyone in the room, we have to go back to where it all began. The truth begins more than 20 years earlier. 20 years before Noah Anderson walked into that audition room, before hospital bills, before unanswered questions, and before anyone had ever heard his name, there was another Anderson capturing the attention of the entire country. His name was Zane Anderson. For nearly a decade, Zane wasn't just a successful musician. He was a phenomenon. His songs dominated radio stations from New York to Los Angeles. His albums sold millions of copies. His face appeared on magazine covers so often that newsstands struggled to keep up with demand. Stadiums sold out within minutes of tickets becoming available. Fans camped outside arenas for days just to secure a seat. Music critics called him the voice of a generation. Industry executives called him the safest investment in entertainment. To the public, Zane Anderson seemed unstoppable. Year after year, his success continued to grow. Awards lined the shelves of his home. Television hosts competed for interviews. Sponsors offered contracts worth millions. Everywhere he went, crowds followed. To millions of Americans, Zane Anderson represented the dream. A small-town musician who had risen to the very top through talent, determination, and an undeniable connection with audiences. Yet those closest to him often noticed something different. While the public saw confidence, they saw pressure. While fans celebrated his success, they witnessed the weight he carried behind closed doors. Because fame has a way of demanding more and more from the people who achieve it. More performances, more appearances, more expectations, more sacrifices. And eventually, those demands began taking their toll. At first, the changes were subtle. A canceled interview here, a missed appearance there. Small incidents that attracted little attention at the time. Most fans barely noticed. But people inside the industry did. Executives began whispering. Managers started asking questions. Something was changing. Then came the rumors. Some claimed Zayn was exhausted from years of relentless touring. Others suggested financial disagreements were creating tension behind the scenes. A few believed conflicts within the family were beginning to affect his career. Nobody knew which stories were true. What everyone did know was that Zane Anderson was slowly becoming more difficult to reach. Interviews became rare. Public appearances decreased. Media access tightened. The man who once seemed to be everywhere suddenly appeared nowhere. The mystery deepened when reporters started noticing unusual patterns. Scheduled appearances were canceled without explanation. Projects disappeared unexpectedly. Business partnerships quietly ended. Questions mounted faster than answers. Yet whenever journalists attempted to investigate, they encountered the same problem. Nobody was willing to talk. Those who knew Zayn best remained silent. His inner circle refused interviews. His associates avoided questions. His family vanished from public attention. And then came the moment that changed everything. One morning, Americans woke up expecting another chapter in the career of their favorite recording artist. Instead, they found nothing. No new music. No press conference. No farewell announcement. No final performance. No explanation. Zayn Anderson simply disappeared. The news spread rapidly. Fans were stunned. Television networks interrupted programming to discuss the mystery. Radio hosts speculated for weeks. Newspapers ran front-page stories asking the same question. Where was Zayn Anderson? Months passed, then years. Still no answers. The silence only fueled more speculation. Some believed he had retired in secret. Others insisted he had become involved in a bitter dispute with powerful figures inside the music industry. A handful of former insiders hinted that something much larger had happened, something connected to people the public had never heard about. But every theory suffered from the same problem. There was no proof, no evidence, no confirmation, only questions. As time passed, the mystery surrounding Zayn became one of the most talked about disappearances in entertainment history. Yet while reporters searched for clues and fans searched for answers, another story was unfolding far from television cameras. A story involving someone much closer to Zayn than anyone realized. Someone who knew exactly what had happened. Someone who understood why he vanished. Someone who carried the truth the world had been searching for. Her name was Venus Anderson. And for reasons nobody would understand until years later, she disappeared too. By the time Noah was born, both Zayn and Venus had become ghosts from a story that most people believed would never be solved. But the truth had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting. Waiting for the moment a 6-year-old boy would walk onto a stage, write down his name, and unknowingly reopen a mystery that had remained buried for nearly 2 decades. Because while the world spent years asking what happened to Zayn Anderson, nobody realized the answer had been living quietly in a small apartment all along. And as Venus lay unconscious in a hospital bed fighting for her life, the secret she had protected for years was closer than ever to being revealed. For as long as Noah Anderson could remember, his world had revolved around one person. Venus Anderson. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. She didn't have a large family gathering around her during holidays or a long list of friends calling every weekend. What she had was Noah. And for her, that was enough. To most people, Venus appeared to be an ordinary single mother doing her best to raise a child in difficult circumstances. She lived in a modest apartment on the edge of town. The furniture was old. The walls needed paint. Some months were harder than others. Yet despite the challenges, she worked tirelessly to create a home that felt safe for her son. Every morning began before sunrise. While Noah slept, Venus prepared for another long day. Sometimes she worked at a local diner during the morning shift. Other times she cleaned offices after business hours. On weekends, she accepted temporary jobs whenever extra money was available. There were weeks when she barely slept. Weeks when exhaustion showed in her eyes. Weeks when she quietly skipped meals so Noah would never have to. Yet somehow, she always found enough energy to smile whenever he walked into the room. To Noah, she wasn't simply his mother. She was his entire world. The two shared a bond that seemed unbreakable. Every evening, no matter how tired she was, Venus made time for him. They ate dinner together. They watched old movies. They sat on the apartment balcony and counted stars. And on nights when money was tight and worries felt overwhelming, Venus would sing. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for sold-out arenas or television audiences. But it carried a warmth that made Noah feel safe. Sometimes she sang songs nobody else seemed to know. Songs that sounded older than the ones played on the radio. Songs filled with memories she never explained. When Noah asked where she had learned them, she would simply smile and say they were family songs. Nothing more. As Noah grew older, his questions grew too. Children naturally become curious about where they come from. And Noah was no different. He wanted to know about grandparents. He wanted to know about cousins. Most of all, he wanted to know about his father. The first time he asked, Venus looked away. The second time, she changed the subject. The third time, she hugged him tightly and told him she loved him more than anything in the world. Yet she still didn't answer. Eventually, Noah began noticing a pattern. Every question about family seemed to bring sadness into her eyes. Not anger, not fear, sadness. As though she carried memories she wasn't ready to share. Sometimes he would catch her staring at old photographs when she thought he wasn't looking. Other times he noticed letters hidden inside drawers. There was also the wooden box she kept locked away. The same box she never allowed him to open. Whatever secrets lived inside it, Venus protected them fiercely. And over time, Noah stopped asking. He assumed she would tell him someday. What he didn't realize was that Venus wasn't keeping those secrets because she wanted to. She was keeping them because she believed she had no choice. For years, she carried that burden alone. Then everything changed. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The diner was busy. Customers filled nearly every table. Employees rushed between orders. Witnesses later remembered seeing Venus working as she always did. Smiling, serving customers, moving quickly from table to table. Then, without warning, she stumbled. At first, people thought she had simply lost her balance. But seconds later she collapsed. The room fell silent. Employees rushed to help. An ambulance arrived within minutes. And Noah's life changed forever. The following days became a blur of hospital hallways, medical tests, worried conversations, and unanswered questions. Doctors worked around the clock searching for answers. Specialists reviewed scans. More tests followed. Then came the diagnosis. The news was devastating. The treatment Venus needed would be long, complicated, expensive, far more expensive than anything she could afford. Insurance covered some costs, but not enough, not even close. The bills arrived quickly. Thousands became tens of thousands. Tens of thousands threatened to become much more. Friends tried to help where they could. Neighbors offered support. Church members organized fundraisers. Yet the gap remained enormous. As the days passed, the conversations among doctors became increasingly urgent. And one night, Noah overheard a discussion that would stay with him forever. He wasn't supposed to hear it. The doctors thought he was asleep in the waiting area. But he wasn't. Hidden around the corner, he listened carefully. One doctor spoke about treatment options. Another discussed financial barriers. Then someone mentioned a possibility that terrified him. Without immediate funding, certain treatments might have to be delayed. Noah didn't understand every medical term. He didn't need to. The message was painfully clear. His mother's recovery depended on resources they simply didn't have. For the first time in his young life, Noah felt completely helpless. He couldn't earn money. He couldn't pay hospital bills. He couldn't fix what was happening. All he could do was sit beside her bed, hold her hand, and hope. But hope alone didn't feel like enough anymore. As he looked at his unconscious mother, Noah made a silent promise. He would find a way to help her, somehow, no matter what it took. At that moment, he had no idea where that path would lead. He had no idea it would eventually place him on a stage in front of judges who recognized his surname. And he certainly had no idea that the family secret his mother had spent years protecting was about to resurface. But fate was already moving. And 3 days later, Noah heard something that gave him hope. 3 days after overhearing the doctors discuss his mother's treatment, Noah Anderson found himself sitting in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of hot chocolate that had long since gone cold. His mind kept replaying the conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. The words echoed endlessly inside his head. Treatment, costs, delays, time running out. At 6 years old, Noah couldn't fully understand the medical details, but he understood enough to know that his mother needed help. And help required money, more money than they had ever seen. That afternoon, an unexpected conversation changed everything. Mrs. Parker, a longtime neighbor who had known Venus for years, stopped by the hospital carrying a small bag of snacks and a handmade card. She sat beside Noah, asked how he was doing, and tried her best to offer comfort. Like everyone else, she wished there was more she could do. Then she mentioned something that immediately caught Noah's attention. A major singing competition was coming to the city. The winner would receive $50,000. For most people, it sounded like a local news story. For Noah, it sounded like a lifeline. $50,000. The number seemed impossibly large. Large enough to matter. Large enough to help. Large enough to give his mother a chance. That night, as he sat beside Venus's hospital bed, a memory surfaced. He remembered all those evenings when she sang to him. The songs she hummed while making dinner. The songs she used to calm him whenever he was scared. The songs she called family songs. For years, he had listened carefully. For years, he had unknowingly memorized every word. And for the first time, a thought entered his mind. What if he could sing them too? The idea sounded ridiculous. He was only 6. He had never performed for an audience. He had never entered a competition. He had never even stood on a stage. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't ignore the possibility. If there was even the smallest chance it could help his mother, he had to try. So Noah made a decision. He would enter the competition, and he wouldn't tell anyone. Over the following days, he began preparing in secret. Every morning before visiting the hospital, he practiced quietly. Every afternoon after leaving her room, he practiced again. Every evening, he found another place to sing. Sometimes it was an empty hallway. Sometimes it was a quiet stairwell. Sometimes it was a small park bench when nobody was around. He sang the songs Venus had taught him. Again, and again, and again. Whenever he made mistakes, he started over. Whenever he grew tired, he remembered why he was doing it. The image of his mother lying unconscious in that hospital bed pushed him forward. On several occasions, nurses noticed him singing softly in the corridors. A few stopped to listen. Others smiled as they walked past. None of them realized what he was preparing for. Meanwhile, Noah continued spending every available moment beside his mother's bed. Although Venus remained unconscious for much of that time, he spoke to her constantly. He told her about his day. He told her about school. He told her about the weather outside. Most importantly, he told her about his plan. Not because he expected her to answer, but because he hoped she could somehow hear him. Every night before leaving, he placed handwritten notes beside her bed. The handwriting was uneven. The spelling wasn't always perfect, but the messages were always the same. I love you. Please get better. I'm trying to help. As the competition date approached, Noah's determination only grew stronger. For the first time since his mother's hospitalization, he felt as though he had a purpose, a goal, a chance, even if the odds were impossible. Then finally, audition day arrived. The morning felt different. The sky was gray. Rain drifted across the city, and Noah barely slept the night before. After visiting his mother and promising he would return soon, he set out for the competition venue. The building was enormous, far larger than anything he had imagined. Hundreds of contestants crowded the entrance. Parents carried equipment. Families offered encouragement. Friends took photographs. Excitement filled the air. Everyone seemed to have someone beside them. Everyone except Noah. As he stepped through the entrance alone, nobody paid much attention. People simply assumed his parents were nearby. Surely a child his age wouldn't arrive by himself. Yet Noah continued walking. Alone. The deeper he moved into the building, the more overwhelming everything became. Alone. Without explanation. Without publicity. Without warning. The coincidence seemed impossible. One judge quietly dismissed the possibility. Anderson wasn't exactly a rare name. There were thousands across the country. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe Noah was completely unrelated. But another judge wasn't convinced. Something about the timing bothered him. Something about the circumstances felt too strange. So while auditions continued, he began making discreet inquiries. What started as simple curiosity quickly became something much larger. Using industry contacts and publicly available records, he started searching. The first information seemed ordinary. A birth certificate, basic registration details, medical emergency contacts. Nothing unusual. Then he discovered something that immediately captured his attention. The mother's name, Venus Anderson. The judge stared at the screen. His pulse quickened, because unlike most people, he remembered that name too. Not from newspaper headlines, not from television interviews, but from industry conversations that had taken place years earlier. Conversations nobody discussed publicly. Conversations connected to Zane Anderson's disappearance. Suddenly, the situation no longer felt like a coincidence. It felt connected. Very connected. The deeper he looked, the stranger everything became. Records showed Venus had deliberately avoided public attention for years. There was almost no digital footprint. Very few photographs. Very little information. Almost as though someone had intentionally disappeared. Or wanted to remain hidden. Then came another discovery. Hospital records. The same records explaining why Noah had entered the competition in the first place. The judge learned about Venus's condition. The treatment. The financial hardship. The desperate circumstances surrounding the family. What began as curiosity was quickly becoming concern. Yet none of it explained the most important question. How exactly were Noah, Venus, and Zane connected? That answer remained hidden, until the judge located an older document buried deep within archived records. At first glance it appeared insignificant. Just another piece of paperwork among hundreds. Then he noticed a date, a name, and a relationship designation. His eyes widened. He checked it again, then again, certain he must have misread something. But the information remained unchanged. If the document was accurate, everything people believed about the Anderson family needed to be reconsidered. The judge immediately searched for supporting records. More documents surfaced, each one strengthening the connection, each one making the situation harder to ignore. A timeline began forming. A timeline stretching from Zane Anderson's disappearance all the way to the little boy waiting backstage. And then came the detail that changed everything. A single piece of information connecting Noah directly to a family history the public had spent nearly 20 years trying to understand. The judge leaned back in his chair, speechless. Across the room, another judge noticed his reaction and asked what he had found. For several moments, he couldn't answer. Not because he didn't know what to say, because he was trying to process it himself. Finally, he looked down at Noah's registration form one more time. The same form that had seemed ordinary only an hour earlier. The same form carrying a surname most people had forgotten. Now it represented something entirely different. Because if those records were true, Noah wasn't just another contestant. By the time Noah Anderson's name was finally called, the auditorium had already seen dozens of performers. Some were talented. Some were nervous. Some were forgettable. The audience had applauded politely. The judges had taken notes. And the competition continued moving forward exactly as expected. Then Noah stepped onto the stage. At first, hardly anyone paid attention. From a distance, he looked impossibly small beneath the bright lights. A 6-year-old boy standing alone in front of a crowd large enough to overwhelm many adults. Several audience members assumed he was simply another child contestant hoping for a lucky break. A few smiled sympathetically. Others returned their attention to the program in their hands. The judges watched quietly. Although they now knew far more about Noah than he realized, they still had no idea what would happen next. After all, family history and musical talent were two completely different things. A famous surname didn't guarantee a remarkable performance. And so, despite their growing curiosity, they remained cautious. The room settled into silence. Noah stood alone at center stage. For a brief moment, he looked terrified. His hands trembled slightly. His heart raced. His eyes scanned the audience before drifting toward the judges. Then, almost instinctively, he thought about his mother, Venus, lying unconscious in a hospital bed, waiting, fighting, depending on a future she couldn't yet see. The fear began to fade, because suddenly this wasn't about the audience. It wasn't about the judges. It wasn't even about the competition. It was about her. The music began. A simple melody filled the auditorium. Nothing dramatic. Nothing flashy. Just a familiar tune. A tune Noah had heard hundreds of times throughout his life. A tune carried through apartment hallways, bedtime routines, and difficult nights when his mother wanted him to feel safe. The audience listened politely. Then Noah sang his first line. Everything changed. The effect was immediate. Not because of power, not because of technical perfection, but because of emotion. Every word felt genuine. Every note carried honesty that couldn't be taught. The audience sensed it instantly. The room grew quieter. Conversations stopped. Programs lowered. Eyes turned toward the stage. Noah continued singing. And with each passing moment, the atmosphere shifted. Something about the performance felt strangely familiar. The melody seemed to awaken memories. Older audience members exchanged glances. A few appeared confused. Others seemed deeply moved. Meanwhile, the judges sat completely still. One leaned forward. Another removed her glasses. The third stared at Noah without blinking. Because they recognized something. Not just the song. The style. The phrasing. The emotion behind it. It reminded them of someone. Someone whose name had not been spoken publicly in years. As Noah sang, memories flooded their minds. Memories of packed arenas. Memories of sold-out tours. Memories of a voice that once captivated millions. And the similarities were becoming impossible to ignore. Back at the hospital, Venus remained unconscious. Machines monitored every heartbeat. Doctors continued their work. Nurses moved quietly through the corridors. Unaware that miles away, a little boy was fighting for her future in the only way he knew how. The performance continued. Audience members wiped tears from their eyes. Some didn't even realize they were doing it. Others leaned forward as though afraid to miss a single word. The emotional connection grew stronger with every verse. What made the moment extraordinary wasn't merely the quality of Noah's voice. It was the reason he was singing. Although the audience didn't yet know the full story, they could feel it. People often recognize sincerity before they understand it. And sincerity filled every second of Noah's performance. As the song approached its final section, the energy inside the auditorium changed once again. One person stood, then another, then another. Within moments, rows of audience members were rising to their feet. The standing ovation had begun before the performance even ended. The judges looked at each other in disbelief. One of them wiped away tears. Another shook his head slowly, struggling to process what he was witnessing. Because this was no longer simply a talent competition. It felt like something else entirely. Something larger. Something connected to a story that had begun decades earlier. Finally, the song ended. The final note faded into silence. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Then the auditorium erupted. Thunderous applause filled the room. People cheered. People cried. People stood clapping long after the music stopped. Noah smiled for the first time all day. Not because he thought he had won, but because he knew he had done his best. And somehow, that felt enough. Eventually, the applause settled. The judges prepared to offer feedback. Yet none of them seemed interested in discussing technique, or stage presence, or vocal ability. Their minds were focused on something entirely different. One judge leaned forward, his expression serious, his voice calm. The audience immediately sensed that something unusual was happening. He looked directly at Noah and asked a simple question. "Where did you learn that song?" Noah answered without hesitation. The response came naturally. The same answer he had given his entire life. "My mom taught me." The judge nodded slowly, then asked another question. "Who taught it to her?" Noah smiled. A smile filled with innocence. A smile belonging to a child completely unaware of the storm his next words were about to create. Then he answered, "My mom said my grandfather wrote it." The judge froze. The audience grew quiet. Noah continued. "She said his name was Zane Anderson." Silence. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Because for the first time in nearly 20 years, someone had publicly connected himself to the man whose disappearance remained one of music's greatest mysteries. And suddenly, every question surrounding Noah Anderson became far more important than anyone had imagined. For several seconds after Noah Anderson spoke those words, nobody in the auditorium moved. The applause had vanished. The cheering had stopped. Even the judges seemed unable to respond. It wasn't simply because Noah had mentioned the name Zane Anderson. It was because he had said it with complete certainty. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no sign that he understood the significance of what he had just revealed. To Noah, Zane Anderson wasn't a mystery. He wasn't a headline. He wasn't a legend. He was simply family. And that single fact changed everything. Backstage, phones were already ringing. Producers exchanged urgent messages. Staff members rushed between offices carrying information that only minutes earlier had seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the judges finally understood why Noah's registration form had caused such an immediate reaction. The investigation was complete. The records matched. The dates aligned. The connections were undeniable. The little boy standing on that stage wasn't merely connected to the Anderson family. He was part of it. Noah Anderson was the grandson of Zane Anderson, the grandson of the most famous musician to disappear from public life at the height of his career. For years, journalists had searched for answers. Fans had created theories. Reporters had followed leads across the country. Yet the truth had remained hidden in plain sight. It had been living quietly inside a modest apartment with Venus Anderson, the same woman now fighting for her life in a hospital bed. The same woman who had spent years protecting a secret she believed could destroy her family all over again. As more pieces fell into place, a clearer picture finally emerged. Years earlier, tensions inside the Anderson family had reached a breaking point. Business partners wanted more control. Executives wanted more money. People with influence wanted access to decisions that affected the future of the family's music empire. Arguments became disputes. Disputes became betrayals. Relationships fractured. Trust disappeared. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood Venus Anderson. Young, determined, and increasingly concerned about what fame was doing to the people she loved. The deeper she became involved in the family's affairs, the more she realized that success came with a price. Private conversations became public gossip. Family disagreements became media headlines. Every decision seemed controlled by people who cared more about profit than people. Eventually, Venus made a choice few understood at the time. She walked away, not because she hated her family, not because she wanted to disappear, but because she wanted peace. She wanted a life away from cameras, away from reporters, away from contracts and negotiations. Most importantly, she wanted to protect her future child from becoming part of a system she no longer trusted. So she left, and when she left, she took her silence with her. The public never learned the full story. The media moved on. The mystery remained unsolved. Until now, standing beneath bright stage lights, Noah had unknowingly reopened a chapter that millions believed would never be finished. The audience listened carefully as fragments of the truth spread through the auditorium. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became disbelief. Many couldn't believe what they were hearing. Others struggled to process it. Yet one question remained unanswered. The biggest question of all. If Noah was truly Zane Anderson's grandson, then where was Zane Anderson? The judges wondered. The audience wondered. The producers wondered. And somewhere deep inside, Noah wondered too. Because despite carrying the Anderson name his entire life, he had never met the man everyone was talking about. He had never seen him, never spoken to him, never known whether he was alive. For years, the answer had remained hidden. Until that very moment. Without warning, movement near the side of the stage drew attention away from the judges. A figure appeared near the entrance. At first, nobody thought much of it. The man looked elderly. His hair was gray, his shoulders slightly bent with age. He moved slowly, carefully, almost cautiously. Most audience members assumed he was a staff member, perhaps someone involved with the production. But the judges immediately reacted. One stood up, then another. A third covered her mouth in shock. The expressions on their faces told the story before a single word was spoken, because they recognized him, even after all these years. Even after decades away from public life, they recognized him instantly. The room fell silent once again. The elderly man continued walking toward the stage, one step at a time. The closer he came, the more people began noticing the resemblance. The eyes, the smile, the features that photographs and album covers had once made famous. A wave of realization swept through the audience. Some gasped, others simply stared, unable to believe what they were seeing. Then the impossible became undeniable. The man standing at the edge of the stage was Zane Anderson. After nearly 20 years of silence, after decades of questions, after endless speculation, he had finally appeared. No grand announcement, no television special, no press conference, just a grandfather quietly walking toward a grandson who didn't yet understand why the entire room looked stunned. Noah stared back. confused, curious, unsure what was happening. Then the elderly man's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Years of absence, years of regret, years of silence, all leading to this single moment. Finally, he stepped forward. Noah looked up at him, and before anyone could say another word, the emotion became overwhelming. Audience members wiped tears from their eyes. Judges openly cried. Even staff members standing backstage struggled to compose themselves, because they weren't simply witnessing the return of a music legend. They were witnessing a family finding its way back together. For the first time in his life, Noah stood face to face with the grandfather he had only heard about in stories. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, Zane Anderson stood before a member of his family, without secrets standing between them. The auditorium sat in stunned silence as generations separated by years of pain, distance, and unanswered questions finally met under the brightest lights imaginable. And while the audience believed they had just witnessed the most emotional moment of the night, the most important reunion was still waiting to happen. While the audience remained on its feet, and the emotional reunion between Noah Anderson and Zane Anderson continued unfolding beneath the stage lights, another battle was still being fought miles away. Inside a quiet hospital room, machines continued their steady rhythm. Doctors moved through hallways. Nurses checked charts. And Venus Anderson remained unaware of everything that had just happened. She didn't know her son had stood before hundreds of people and sung his heart out. She didn't know the Anderson family mystery had finally been uncovered. She didn't know that after nearly 20 years of silence, her father had stepped back into the world. But that was about to change. As news of the extraordinary audition spread, local television stations began covering the story. Clips of Noah's performance started appearing online. Viewers shared the footage. Reporters rushed to verify details. Within hours, the story had grown far beyond a local talent competition. People weren't simply talking about a young boy trying to save his mother. They were talking about the return of Zane Anderson, the missing legend, the man who had vanished at the peak of his fame, the mystery that had remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades. And at the center of it all stood Noah, the little boy who never wanted attention, the little boy who only wanted his mother to get better. Meanwhile, doctors continued monitoring Venus's condition. Then, during the early hours of the following morning, something remarkable happened. Movement. A slight movement at first. A small response that quickly drew attention. Nurses gathered. Doctors arrived. Tests were performed. And after weeks of uncertainty, Venus finally opened her eyes. The room immediately filled with relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope. Real hope. As Venus slowly regained awareness, confusion filled her expression. She looked around the room. The machines. The hospital walls. The faces of medical staff. Then her thoughts immediately turned to one person. Noah. The question appeared in her eyes before she was even strong enough to ask it aloud. Where was her son? A nurse smiled and handed her a television remote. Venus looked puzzled. Then the screen came to life. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. News anchors, crowds, camera flashes. Then came footage from the competition. And suddenly, everything stopped. There was Noah, standing beneath bright stage lights, singing, fighting for her, doing everything he could to save her life. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Every sacrifice she had made, every difficult decision, every sleepless night, every struggle, all of it came rushing back. Yet nothing prepared her for what appeared next. The television replayed footage from the end of the audition. The moment the elderly man stepped onto the stage. The moment the crowd realized who he was. The moment 20 years of silence finally ended. Venus stared at the screen in disbelief. Because standing beside Noah was someone she never expected to see again. Zane Anderson. Her father. The man whose absence had shaped so much of her life. The man she believed she had lost forever. For several moments, she simply watched, unable to speak, unable to process what had happened. Then the hospital room door opened. Venus turned her head, and there stood Noah. The moment he saw his mother awake, he ran toward her. Years from now, nobody would remember the exact words spoken between them. They didn't need to. The emotions said everything. Relief, love, gratitude, joy. The kind of moment that reminds people what truly matters. Then another figure appeared in the doorway. A figure Venus recognized instantly. Time seemed to stand still. Father and daughter stared at one another. neither knowing where to begin. 20 years of separation, 20 years of misunderstandings, 20 years of unanswered questions, all reduced to a single moment. Slowly, Zane stepped forward. Venus's eyes filled with tears. So did his. Some wounds take years to heal. Some conversations require decades before they can finally happen. And sometimes life offers one last chance to say the things that should have been said long ago. That day became the beginning of a new chapter for the Anderson family. The publicity surrounding Noah's story generated overwhelming support. Donations arrived from across the country. People who had never met the family wanted to help. Medical organizations offered assistance. Former colleagues reached out. And before long, the financial burden that once seemed impossible no longer stood in the way of Venus's treatment. For the first time in years, the future looked different. Brighter, hopeful, possible. And at the center of that transformation stood a 6-year-old boy who refused to quit. A little boy who refused to accept that the story was over. A little boy who chose courage when fear would have been easier. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by the strongest people. They're won by the people who refuse to quit, even when they have every reason to give up. The story of Noah Anderson was never really about fame. It was never about music. It was never about solving a decades-old mystery. It was about family. It was about forgiveness. It was about second chances. And most of all, it was about hope. The kind of hope that survives difficult nights. The kind of hope that keeps people moving forward when every reason to stop says otherwise. The kind of hope that changed the lives of Noah, Venus, and Zane Anderson forever. Never underestimate the power of hope. What would you have done if you were Noah? Do you think family secrets should always stay buried? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe for more unforgettable stories every week.